So here it is, the day that will change IndyCar racing forever. The charter agreement has been ratified by the teams and by Penske Entertainment, and now IndyCar racing has a charter system similar to the NASCAR Cup Series. And I say similar because I guess the good news, and unfortunately it means our standards are pretty low at this point, not much has actually changed for now. And I think that is going to be the big emphasis in this video is going to be now IndyCar racing has a charter agreement and it's not going to drastically change what IndyCar racing looks like. That being said, there are provisions in this agreement. There are loopholes left open that can drastically change IndyCar racing and change it for the worst. So, with all of that said, we're going to take a look at the IndyCar release. We're going to take a look at a few different details that were let out by Bob Pockris, who now I guess we're going to see a lot of Bob Pockris in the IndyCar world, as well as Marshall Pruitt. And I'll try to give my analysis of this particular situation and where I think some of these details may eventually lead. And it's not all good, although I think early on, I have to give a thumbs up and be satisfied with this charter agreement because it doesn't ruin a whole lot. DL 500 Club on Wednesday, and we'll be talking in a public video as well, some of the silly season stuff, as well as the fact that the Dallas Street Race leaked yesterday. We'll talk about that. So let's take a look at IndyCar's release. They sent this to the media, and obviously they sent it out publicly as well. IndyCar confirmed today the establishment of a charter system across the NTT IndyCar Series. In total, owners of 10 teams have accepted charters for 25 entries competing in North America's premier open-wheel racing series. Now, here's what's important. While a chartered entry is guaranteed a starting spot on the grid at all NTT IndyCar Series races, it excludes the Indianapolis 500. An entry must also be chartered to qualify for the annual NTT IndyCar Series Leader Circle program, an annual award that compensates up to 22 finishers in the prior year's championship. And the charter agreement has been ratified through 2031. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But I think one of the big things for me right off of the bat is I am a bit confused. Now, there's two arguments here, but I'm confused about why only the top 22 will still qualify for Leader Circle money. Now, if you don't know, the IndyCar Series doesn't really have prize money. There is some prize money, but it's not a lot. The vast majority of money that a team earns from the series throughout the year is if you can qualify into the top 22 in points. Then you qualify for the Leader Circle program, which gains you just over $1 million in cash and prizes that you can take into the next season or just top off your budget. And in previous years, it has been totally merit-based. If you entered the championship and ran all of the races, as long as you were in the top 22 in points, you got the prize money. Now, in recent years, there has been a lot of talk, not from the series because they don't promote the Leader Circle, but from the media and the teams about the battle to get in the Leader Circle, to earn that prize money, to make life a little bit easier when you put together next year's budget. What I don't understand here is if you are a chartered team, you've earned a charter, why are you not automatically eligible for prize money? I get it. You would have to, if you're IndyCar, increase the budget by $3+ million. But if I'm a team owner, and I'm one of those team owners who's kind of on the teetering edge of 22nd in the point standings, I would feel a little bit nervous having a charter but not being guaranteed money. Now, maybe the charter and the ability to be guaranteed a spot, whatever that means, for every race except for the Indianapolis 500 allows me to sell better sponsorships or bring in better funded drivers that I would be able to previously. But this is one of those things where I'm confused about where the value actually lies in the charters. It would have made a lot more sense if it was you get a charter and that gives you an automatic berth into the leader circle. That would make a lot of sense to me. But that's not how they're doing it. So I would, at the very least, hope they start promoting the battle for the leader circle money, because somebody's got to benefit from the fact that you're going to make it a competitive thing within the charter agreement. The only point that I've seen brought up that I do agree with is that you're trying to incentivize teams to put their best foot forward. In other words, if, for example, IndyCar just paid every team in the top 25 automatically, they would potentially, some of your bottom feeding teams would bring in a funded driver who is not competitive at all just to keep their business going. I could see a situation like that. So if that is the idea behind it, to try to keep it somewhat merit-based, okay. But from my perspective, I don't know. You're allegedly trying to create these charters to provide value to the teams, but you haven't put any more monetary value into the leader circle system, which, at least right now, I would say is probably more valuable than the charter, or the value to having a charter is that you can qualify for the leader circle. The chartered teams, this is not much of a surprise. We've known this for a very long time. AJ Foyt gets 2, Andretti Global gets 3, Arrow McLaren gets 3, Chip Ganassi gets 3. That means they'll have to reduce their car count. Now, Chip has said in other articles that they're planning on 3. I think there's a very good chance that there's a 4th Ganassi car at some points during next season, particularly at the Indianapolis 500, but maybe some more races. You never know. Coyne gets 2, Carpenter gets 2, Hunkos gets 2, Shank gets 2, Rahal gets 3, and Penske gets 3. And here's a few of the team owners that were able to speak to IndyCar. Larry Foyt says, I appreciate the efforts made by IndyCar and the Penske leadership groups, as well as the owners, to get this charter system started. It's incredibly challenging to get a large group of owners to agree on something, and certainly there was some give and take. But in the end, I believe this is the path that is beneficial for all owners, for IndyCar, and while also maintaining the availability for open competition. Now, that's a very interesting quote, because we're going to come over here to Bob Pockrass of Fox Sports, and now Fox Sports IndyCar. By the way, you want to talk about an asset of bringing Fox in, having Bob Pockrass talk about IndyCar racing. But Bob says, IndyCar charter system, the things we know, 25 charters, 3 max based on last year's full-time. Teams can also field non-chartered cars. So this is a point that there was some concern going into next year, was there had been some rumors going around that not only would the charter system be capped at 25 entries, but ostensibly you would also be capping the field not only at 27, which they're doing, but you would prevent chartered teams from entering non-chartered cars. So that would, for all intents and purposes, protect the 2 Prema cars from any kind of an assault. For example, Chip Ganassi couldn't enter 4 cars at a race, or Andretti couldn't enter 4 cars at a race. Now, at the Indianapolis 500, all of these things that I'm saying, throw them out the window. The Indy 500 is staying the same. Chip Ganassi could enter 9 cars. Andretti could enter 10. Doesn't matter. You can enter as many cars as you want the Indy 500, and you're not guaranteed a starting spot for any of them. That's the way it should be. But from the perspective of the full season, based on my reading of this, it doesn't look like Prema is going to be protected in those 26th and 27th spot. If a non-charter team wants to come on in, they can and try to knock Prema out of the field. And presumably, that would also mean that if you're Ganassi or you're Rahal or you're Andretti, you could enter an extra car at another race and try to knock the Premas out of the field. Now, there's a lot more details, and full credit to Marshall Pruitt for this article. It will be linked in the description because there's a ton of information. I won't go over all of it because I want you to read the article. But there were some things that I thought were very interesting in this, which is to say that there was, I guess, some dissent among the ranks. Marshall specifically mentions two team owners were unhappy, although there's no names named. We can only assume that there were a couple. I would say, think of it this way, and again, I'm guessing here based on what team owners kind of have been critical in the past. You would look at someone like Michael Andretti, potentially, someone like Zach Brown, who in his article specifically mentioned, that the charter system was a good step in the right direction, but it wasn't a revenue sharing program, which he didn't like. And of course, the Dale Coyne rule that we're going to talk about here in a second, which is supposed to limit teams to 3 drivers per car per year. So let's talk about that Dale Coyne rule, because, well, actually, let's talk about the 27 car cap. That's the first thing I want to talk about because this is super important. It was something that we can spin off with Bob Pockris, and it's kind of weird, right? With the 27 car limit and 25 charters guaranteed participation of the 25 entries at each race, it leaves the 2 charter positions on the grid for Prema. Now, they're the only non-charter outfit that's been approved to compete in the series. Interesting. So, for example, if Abel were to produce a car to show up and try to bump Prema out of the field, they would have to get approved by the series. But of course, and that comes to the whole issue, I think, with the charters right now, is if you were, for example, going to try to sell a charter, where is the market outside of Prema? And IndyCar has thought about this. And this is where it gets a little bit concerning, because while 27 is the limit, that won't always be the case. By leaving it out and making the domain of IndyCar's sporting regulations, the series parent company has given itself the latitude to reduce the cap in the coming years to no more than 25 cars, which, and I can corroborate this, is definitely expected through the paddock. That's something that I've heard quite a bit, is that supposedly, allegedly, IndyCar eventually wants the full season IndyCar Series to be limited to 25 cars, the 25 teams that own charters, and nobody else is let in. And let me put this as extremely clearly as I can, okay? Extremely clear here. If IndyCar does this, it's a gigantic mistake. Gigantic mistake. Right now, you've got a market for Prema to buy 2 charters. But if you never allow other teams to take a shot at or dip their toe into the water at a race that's not the Indianapolis 500, 2 things are going to happen. Number one, your market for potential charter buyers is going to dry up because no one can try. No one can put together a team and see if they can make IndyCar racing work. They will essentially have to buy a charter blind, buy a team outright, essentially, and hope they can compete. The second thing, while entries are not locked in and apparently never will be locked in, at least till 2031 for the Indianapolis 500, if you start locking the full season entries at 25 and you can only be an IndyCar team the rest of the year if you have a charter, what incentive is there and how can you be competitive at the Indianapolis 500 as a single car or Indy only team? You can't be. And so here is my deep-seated fear that will eventually happen, particularly to the Indianapolis 500. It will be, you'll have Andretti enter 5 cars and Ganassi will enter 6 and Penske will enter 5, and that will fill the field. You will have lost the minnows. You will have lost some of the startup teams that will have to eventually take over because let's be honest here, guys, nothing lasts forever. And eventually team owners do actually go away. Like Pat Patrick is unfortunately no longer with us, and neither is his team. There are a whole lot of IndyCar teams, Newman Haas, gone. And it's not, they weren't gone because they didn't have a charter. They're gone because their owners aged out of it. They couldn't find sponsorship anymore, and their lives had moved away from IndyCar racing. This will happen to all of us. This will happen to everyone. And my fear is there won't be a replacement rate if you make it the old boys club. And that's a very real concern from my end about the charter agreement and where they might be pointing this thing. Okay? I'm concerned about that. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, too, in this article, if I can find it, was the fact that Pensky Entertainment owns 25% of each charter. So if any charters are sold, Penske gets 25% of any sale of a charter. So, for example, and this was something that I've thought about for a while, when we're talking about the Dale Coyne rule, which is the idea that you can only have 3 drivers per entry per season, I thought to myself, Dale should just sell at least one of his charters, if not 2, to Prema right away, cash out immediately, because in my opinion, once Prema gets their charters, the market for charters is closed. No one else is out there on the horizon looking to buy one, right? At least for the foreseeable future. So you could almost cash out early and then bring as many pay drivers as you want, make as much money as you can as a team owner. But with the apparent willingness of IndyCar to limit the field at some point, with the idea that Prema is the only team that does not have a charter that is approved to compete, there are some serious question marks that I have going into the future of what this means for expansion of IndyCar, for new teams and new ideas that could potentially come in to this series. There are some concerns on my end. For now, the charter agreement means that the Indy 500 will look very similar to the way that it has in previous years. And outside of Portland this year, we haven't been thinking about fields of 28 cars or above. And so outside of a random entry from a Rahal or a Ganassi or whoever, we'll never have to think about bumping at a race outside of the Indianapolis 500. And frankly, we haven't had to think about that for most of IndyCar history. But the future, maybe it's bright, but there are some things that I'm concerned about in reading this that, just make me a little bit nervous. And then a couple of people have brought this up to me too, is the team owners are only happy with the charter agreement until they're not happy with the charter agreement. And what happens then? I don't know. It's a strange new world out there, folks. I guess we're living in it now. We'll be talking about silly season, and I'll be streaming for the DL500 Club on Wednesday. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.